Iran has drawn a hard red line and delivered a stark warning. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says Tehran has no intention of attacking its neighbors, but if the United States strikes Iran, American military bases across the region will be legitimate targets. Speaking to Al Jazeera, Araghchi made it clear Iran cannot hit U.S. soil, but it can and will respond where U.S. forces are stationed in the Middle East. At the center of his message is Iran's nuclear program. Araghchi said Iran will keep all enriched uranium inside the country and will decide enrichment levels strictly based on national needs. Enrichment, he insisted, is Iran's right and non-negotiable. Zero enrichment, he said, is completely off the table, arguing that even past bombings of nuclear facilities have failed to erase Iran's technical capabilities. According to Araghchi, Iran's nuclear dispute can only be resolved through negotiations, but only if those talks are realistic, respectful, and free from threats or pressure. He said Tehran is prepared to reach what he called a reassuring agreement on enrichment, one that builds confidence on both sides, but he warned that coercion will lead nowhere. Contacts with Washington so far, he said, have been indirect and strictly limited to the nuclear file. Araghchi described the talks as having a good start, while cautioning that rebuilding trust will be a long and difficult process. He also ruled out any future negotiations on Iran's missile program, declaring flatly that missile talks are impossible, now or ever. On the regional picture, Araghchi accused the United States of enabling Israeli dominance in the Middle East, saying current developments are not defensive, but designed to give Israel superiority over others in the region. The warning comes as pressure on Tehran intensifies. President Donald Trump has said the U.S. is in no rush to strike a deal, but warned Iran that the consequences of failure would be very steep. On Friday, Trump signed an executive order imposing secondary sanctions through tariffs on countries importing Iranian goods and services, citing threats to U.S. national security. The U.S. Treasury has also rolled out fresh sanctions targeting individuals, companies, and vessels linked to Iran, just hours after nuclear talks in Muscat. Reports say neither side moved far from their original positions, with Iran again refusing to halt enrichment. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department has urged American citizens to leave Iran immediately or shelter in secure locations. Diplomacy continues, but the stakes and the warnings have never been higher.
Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a privilege to address you at this distinguished forum and discuss the profound question of our region, Palestine. Let me begin with the fact that the region has learned through decades of painful experience, and that the world is learning again at a terrible human cost. Palestine is not one issue among many. Palestine is the defining question of justice in West Asia and beyond. It is the strategic and moral compass of our region. It is a test of whether international law has meaning, whether human rights have universal value, and whether global institutions exist to protect the weak or merely to rationalize the power of the strong. For generations, the Palestinian crisis was understood primarily as the consequence of an illegal occupation and the denial of an inalienable right, the right of a people to self-determination. But today, we must recognize that the crisis has moved far beyond the parameters of occupation alone. What we are witnessing in Gaza is not merely war. It is not a conflict between equal parties. It is not an unfortunate byproduct of security measures. It is the deliberate destruction of civilian life on a massive scale. It is genocide. The human cost of Israel's atrocities in Gaza has wounded the conscience of humanity. It has torn open the heart of the Muslim world, and it has also shaken millions beyond it, Christians, Jews, and people of all faiths, who still believe that the life of a child is not a bargaining chip, that starvation is not a weapon, that hospitals are not battlefields, and that the killing of families is not self-defense. Palestine today is not simply a tragedy. It is a mirror held up to the world. It reflects not only the suffering of Palestinians, but also the moral failure of those who had the power to stop this catastrophe and choose instead to justify it, enable it, or normalize it. But Palestine and Gaza is not only a humanitarian crisis. It has become the platform for something larger and more dangerous, an expansionist project pursued under the banner of security. The project has three consequences, each of them profound, each of them alarming. The first consequence is global. The Israeli regime's conduct in Palestine and the impunity granted to it have deeply damaged the international legal order. We must say this clearly. The world is moving toward a condition where international law no longer is respected and governs international relations. What is perhaps most dangerous is the precedent being established that if a state has sufficient political cover and protection, it may bomb civilians, besiege populations, target infrastructures, assassinate individuals across borders, and still demand to be regarded as lawful. This is not merely a Palestinian problem, it is a global problem. We are witnessing not only the tragedy of Palestine, but the transformation of the world into a place where the law is replaced by force. The second consequence is regional. Israel's expansionist project has had a direct and destabilizing impact on the security of all countries in the region. The Israeli regime now openly violates borders. It breaches sovereignties. It assassinates official dignitaries. It conducts terrorist operations. It expands its reach in multiple theaters. And it does so not discreetly, but with a sense of entitlement, because it has learned that international accountability will not come. Let us be candid. If the Gaza issue is settled through destruction and forced displacement, if that becomes the model, then the West Bank will be the next. Annexation will become policy. This is the essence of what has long been called the Greater Israel. The question, therefore, is not whether Israel's actions threaten Palestinians alone. The question is whether the region will accept a future in which borders are temporary, sovereignty is conditional, and security is determined not by law or diplomacy, but by the ambitions of a militarized occupier. The third consequence is structural, and perhaps the most dangerous. Israel's expansionist project requires that neighboring countries be weakened, militarily, technologically, economically, and socially, so that the Israeli regime permanently enjoys the upper hand. Under this project, Israel is free to expand its military arsenal without limits, including weapons of mass destruction that remain outside any inspection regime. Yet, other countries are demanded to disarm. Others are pressured to reduce defensive capacity. Others are punished for scientific progress. Others are sanctioned for building resilience. Nobody should be confused. This is not arms control. It is not non-proliferation. It is not security. It is the enforcement of permanent inequality. Israel must have a military, intelligence, and a strategic edge, and others must remain vulnerable. This is a doctrine of domination. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why the Palestinian question is not only a humanitarian issue, it is a strategic issue. It is not only about Gaza and the West Bank, it is about the future of our region and the rules of the world. So what must be done? It is not enough to express concern. It is not enough to issue statements. It is not enough to mourn. We need a coordinated strategy of action. Legal, diplomatic, economic, and security-based, rooted in the principles of international law and collective responsibility. First, the international community must support legal mechanisms without hesitation. Second, there must be consequences for violations. We call for comprehensive and targeted sanctions against Israel, including an immediate arms embargo, the suspension of military and intelligence cooperation, restrictions on officials, and banning trade. Third, we need a credible political horizon grounded in law. The international community must affirm the end of occupation, the right of return and compensation in accordance with international law, and the establishment of a unified and independent Palestinian state with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. Fourth, the humanitarian crisis must be treated as a matter of urgent international responsibility. Collective punishment must never be normalized. Fifth, regional states must coordinate to protect sovereignty and deter aggression. The principle must be clear. Security cannot be built on the insecurity of others. And finally, the Islamic world, the Arab world, and the nations of the global South must build a united diplomatic front. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the Arab League, and the regional organizations must move beyond symbolism toward coordinated action. Legal support, diplomatic initiatives, economic measures, and strategic messaging. This is not about confrontation. It is about preventing the region from being reshaped by force. Dear colleagues, let no one miscalculate. A region cannot be kept stable by allowing one actor to act above the law. The doctrine of impunity will not produce peace. It will produce wider conflict. The path to stability is clear. Justice for Palestine, accountability for crimes, an end to occupation and apartheid, and a regional order built on sovereignty, equality, and cooperation. If the world wants peace, it must stop rewarding aggression. If the world wants stability, it must stop enabling expansionism. If the world believes in international law, it must enforce it consistently and without double standards. And if the nations of this region seek a future free from perpetual war, they must recognize this fundamental truth. Palestine is not merely a cause for solidarity. It is the indispensable cornerstone of regional security. Thank you so much for your attention.